8 short history stories, each built around one overlooked choice, contradiction, or consequence. From imperial Rome to Normandy to a museum inside a UNESCO site, these facts get stranger the closer you look. Here is the strange part: in the 4th century, one Roman emperor still lived in Rome. His name was Maxentius, and that detail is rarer than it sounds. By then, emperors were increasingly ruling from other centers instead of the old capital. Rome still carried the empire's image, but practical rule was no longer anchored to its streets. That is what makes Maxentius notable. The point is not only that he was emperor, but that he actually resided in the city itself, in Rome. His residence turns Rome into a measuring stick for change. If an emperor living there feels unusual, the center of government was already shifting somewhere else. So the image that remains is surprisingly concrete. As imperial power drifted away, one emperor was still sleeping, receiving visitors, and waking each day inside the old capital, near a Roman palace. Ancient robbers entered this Egyptian tomb, yet one hidden cache stayed untouched for thousands of years. That is the strange part. In 1914, archaeologists worked inside the tomb of Sithothorianate. They were not opening a perfect time capsule, but searching a place already disturbed. Then came the turn. Inside that robbed tomb, they found a cache ancient looters had missed. The irony is simple and concrete. Because that cache escaped antiquities' black market, it reached modern archaeology instead. A surviving find moved through excavation, not ancient resale. So the lasting image is not a grand treasure room. It is a small sealed space inside Sithothorianate's tomb, unnoticed through centuries of dust. At Castelnaudary, defenders were caught off guard in the middle of a meal while the siege was still active. That should sound like the moment a city falls. The place was Castelnaudary, a city already under pressure. In a siege, even ordinary acts like sitting down to eat happen inside danger. But the strange turn is simple and concrete. Being surprised at the table did not decide the fight, and the defenders still came out on top. The immediate result matters more than the interruption itself. The siege fight ended in the defenders' favor, despite that exposed moment. So the image that remains is not a broken wall or a captured street. It is a city still held, with an interrupted meal left behind. One of Normandy's biggest numbers was not a landing force or a map advance. It was 30,000 combat exhaustion cases treated by the U.S. Army. This happened during the Battle of Normandy, after D-Day, when the campaign stretched beyond the beach into weeks of grinding combat inland. The striking part is the category itself. The Army counted in treated combat exhaustion as a medical and military problem, and the total reached 30,000 cases. That meant fighting strength was measured by more than visible wounds. The campaign depended on handling mental strain while the battle was still moving. So alongside trucks, maps, and bandages, Normandy also ran on men pushed past endurance. In the half-light of a canvas station, medics worked beside exhausted soldiers. Some Soviet anarchists defended a startling idea: dictatorship first, then anarchy and communism. Put those words on the same table, and the contradiction is immediate. They were working inside a Soviet revolutionary world where power, order, and political change felt urgent and unfinished. In that setting, the question was not only the goal, but the road. Their answer was a transition stage, a temporary middle step before the destination. They argued dictatorship could clear the path toward anarchy and communism, even if the tool clashed with the end. That move bent ideology around state power in an unexpected way. A politics aimed at life beyond authority was, for a moment, asking authority to lead. The human scale of the paradox is simple enough to picture. An anarchist could look at the state not as a home, but as a bridge crossed under a single lamp. Before many people picture formal government that far west, English courts were already operating at Hanna's town, beyond the Allegheny Mountains. That mountain barrier is the key. Many viewers imagine the frontier there as cabins, trails, and forts, not a place hosting English legal procedure. But Hanna's town was tied to a different reality. It hosted the first English courts west of the Alleghenies, carrying institutions past that expected line. So the western edge was being organized through courts as well as settlement. Authority arrived not only with roads and cabins, but with hearings. On that frontier, English expansion did not stop at the mountain wall. It reached a room where people faced a bench at Hanna's town. A poem many readers meet as literature first came from something far starker. Two men disappeared in the Australian outback. The writer was Mary Hannay Foott, and this became her best-known poem. The event behind it belongs to 1877, in the outback. That is the turn in the story. The poem was not built from a purely imagined scene, it was inspired by a real disappearance. Once that link is known, the poem changes shape. It carries frontier memory, holding on to an event after the men themselves were simply missing. So behind a remembered piece of verse stands a bare historical image, 1877, the Australian interior, and two absent men somewhere beyond the scrub. A museum inside a UNESCO site still faced demolition. That was the Cristero Museum, standing in a place many people would assume was already protected. The setting matters. The Cristero Museum sat within a UNESCO site, an internationally recognized heritage zone inside a larger protected landscape. But UNESCO status is recognition, not an automatic shield over every structure. A site can carry heritage prestige while one museum inside it still faces local demolition pressure. That is the hard consequence. Heritage designation and real protection on the ground are not always the same thing, even inside a celebrated zone. So the image to keep is simple. A museum can stand inside a protected landscape, under a famous heritage label, and still remain vulnerable as a museum. If you like history where one detail changes the whole picture, this is the archive for you. Subscribe and tell us which story deserves a full deep dive next.